Super excited to be joined today with Philip Schwartz from At Properties in the beautiful city of Chicago. And Philip, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Dennis. Great to be here.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your story. How'd you get into real estate?
My story is, I'm going to say, pretty common in that I've heard it from a few other people over the years, although I think mine was maybe a little different in terms of the circumstances at the time. But basically, this was 2000, and my wife and I bought our first place. And we saw something driving home from running an errand, and we went in, checked it out. Told my brother I was thinking about buying a place. He's like, "Hey, you should talk to my real estate agent." I was like, "Great," and I did. And we went in. It was a builder, and we had a very, very good experience. But part of the experience had to do with them trying to argue that they didn't have to pay my real estate agent because she didn't have procuring cause because I walked through the door prior to that, the whole threshold act thing. We don't have that anymore anywhere in the US because buyer brokerage is required by law in Illinois and by National Association of Realtors. But just the same, I turned to the fellow at the time and I said, "Listen, I've never done this before. I'd like a professional to help me. If you're not compensating her, I'm not doing this transaction. So you choose and you let me know." And then after the transaction was over, I just had such a good vibe with it. I got probably an over the top closing gift from my client. She basically wrote us a check for $1,000, and she's like, "Go buy yourself a couch." Now that's not typical for anybody who's watching this, just so you know. But I was just the same. I had a great experience, and I think part of it was that she just appreciated the fact that I didn't hesitate when it came to protecting her commission. But I walked away with a really great feeling of it. And I had been working selling building materials for years. And I basically turned to my wife and I said, I'm not really enjoying what I'm doing work wise. Yes, I'm making a reasonable living, but it would be nice if I could make that kind of money or better and actually enjoy it. And she's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I'm like, "Well, I really kind of enjoy the whole real estate process." And she's like, "Okay, good. Go do that." And if you knew my wife, Jennifer, that you know that that is essentially like 100% support behind you. It's just kind of how we interact and what have you. But yeah, in 2 seconds, she's like, "Great, go do that." And so that's where it started, basically. And so I've always tried to be very guarded about my clients. Especially when they're buying, their first home. And I've worked with hundreds over the years and done thousands of transactions. But that's how the whole thing started. It was just a very wonderful experience with my real estate agent B, and that's where my career began. And since then, we just keep wash, rinse, repeat. And it never gets tiring. There's never a day that's the same. And for those of you who are joining us and you wouldn't have heard the story that wasn't recorded prior to this, but my biography will be titled "Adventures in Real Estate. You Can't Make This Shit Up If You Try."
I love it. Well, and I love that, like right out of the gate, even before you were licensed, you were already negotiating.
Right. Right.
So, and it sounds like that's a part of the job that you really enjoy.
I do, and sometimes I don't enjoy it, having to sort of point out to my clients what I really think is going to happen, even when it's not something that they want to hear. One of my recent negotiations was such that we were challenged and we bent over backwards to give the seller what they wanted. And the seller then turned around and said, "We'll get back with you in several days." And my reasoning for telling my clients to walk away from it was simply this: we'd already conceded the leverage in the high ground. By conceding the leverage in the high ground a second time in a row without getting anything in return from them or any sense of where they stood on the rest of the terms, I told my clients, when next week rolls around and they do round back up with us, even if they don't have another offer, they're going to feel entitled and they're going to feel as though they have complete control and that we have acquiesced at every turn. Why wouldn't they challenge us to continue to acquiesce? And
Mhm.
in this case, we pulled our offer, walked away, and decided in advance that if in fact that they responded, that we already had a pre-formulated answer for them. So should that agent actually pick up the phone, we already know what we're going to respond with. I don't have to get off the call to go check with my clients. I already have permission to respond in a very specific fashion. And so it might be seen as a bit aggressive, but it's not. It's just because we feel like at this point, any offer is going to be met with heavy resistance for anything that we find in the way of inspection issues. But those are the types of things where you have to have a hard conversation with the client. And sometimes you have to have a hard conversation where you got to say, hey, I really like the house. I think it's pretty, but I think there's far too much exposure
Mhm.
in terms of problems and or costs associated with fixing those problems.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Yeah, and well, and loving your clients enough to tell them the truth and to help them negotiate in a way that is going to produce a fair outcome, not a one-sided one.
right. I mean, I ultimately you have to understand, and sellers and buyers, the only time that they're on the same page is after the price point and the contract have been agreed upon. Terms are usually not that big a deal when it comes to residential real estate. I mean, you've got how many days prior to close? You've got, maybe the tax proration, but in the grand scheme of things, if you're 2 or 3% off on a $5,000 tax bill, you're talking about $100 to $150.
Mhm.
Home inspection is usually the next biggest piece outside of price, but the actual terms besides that are really not that big a deal. So really, once you get the price established, if there's not much on the home inspection, everything that both buyer and seller do should be, a bit of a compromise to get to the closing table.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, if you're going into that part with, a mutual respect in the negotiating process, then you can end up with a much better result at the end of the day, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me a little bit about the Chicago real estate market today. What are you seeing out there?
It's quiet. Um, I expected this. I expected a bit of a return similar to last year. Our closings have been down for the last several weeks. I look at the data on a weekly basis. Thankfully, easy enough to do. Not that they're outside sources, but Midwest Real Estate Data, which is the company that owns our multiple listing service, provides the data. It was really interesting the first 4 months of the year. We had more sales every single week for the first 16 weeks of the year, except for two than the prior year. But we had less closings every single week except for two for the first 16 weeks. So the question becomes, why are we writing so many transactions but not closing? Then finally, the first week of May rolled around and the old numbers started to pop in. March, April, and May all had 13% failure rate or more
Mm,
on contracts written. That means if I had 10 buyers and wrote 10 contracts, not offers, just like literally signed contracts, it meant one of the 10 wasn't going to make it.
mm,
That's a high, high failure rate, as high as I've ever seen it in 21 years of doing this. So there are sales, but there are things that are not moving as fast as they once were. There is little doubt in my mind that the best part of this year was effectively February, March, and April.
mhm,
First week of May was when you saw the top start to come off. By the second week, you absolutely could feel it. The difference was an open house with 15 to 25 people versus 60 to 80.
mm. Wow.
And we started to see stuff catching market time. I also think for certain categories, and again, I'm kind of data driven, but one of the categories that I think has softened is the high end multi unit market. I think they're collecting north of, we'll say 1.25 million. I think they're collecting a lot of market time. I'm seeing too many listings where it's 1.8 million for a two flat with a coach house. So there's 3 units. But once you put 25% down, you're still negative $2,000 a month. Now, is that manageable if you're living in it? Absolutely. But the second you move out of it, I mean, we'd all like to think we know what's going to happen in our lives for the next 3, 5, 8 years. But should that change and a year out, you have to leave that place, you're paying for the privilege of holding it,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And you can take that loss, and maybe your portfolio and your financial or fiscal situation, makes it easy to have, something that you're writing off. But for most people, I don't think that's the case.
Mhm.
And so 2 or 3 of the units that I have earmarked are sitting there. They're still active 5 months after I saved them into my own personal search.
Yeah. So what are some factors that you think are contributing to the slowdown that you're seeing, or the slowdown number one, and the amount of fallout that you're seeing number two?
I think part of the slowdown is a function of summertime travel. Um, I think I mean, historically, July and August have been pretty slow, but I felt like June was as well. Some of this can come down to dumb luck. You can certainly talk to an agent where I'm like, I'm shocked at how busy I am. And it's not like I don't have active clients. I'm talking more about the pace of the market, less my business. And I
Okay.
think that's a confusing factor for a lot of agents you know so when I say that I think the market's slow, I mean, I think that what would have sold in 3 days is now selling in 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Okay.
So we've also seen a drop in our inventory for like the sixth straight year. We're not running like most other major markets. I want to say last year the top 10 markets, and we were down towards the bottom, but we were the only one in the Midwest, and almost everything else was along the East Coast.
Okay.
And not the south part of it, like starting more like near Massachusetts and working up towards Vermont.
Okay.
So it was kind of weird. Places like, um, Phoenix, Florida were flat or had seen a return into inventory, or maybe even, small, retraction.
Hmm.
So as far as the increase in market time and what's causing the slowdown, like I said, I think it's the heat, the summer, wanting to get the vacations in. For some of those buyers, my first multiple offer situation this past spring, it was a $850,000 property. The average offer was over 900,000. It actually sold for 935 on 850. Six of the offers were cash. Five of them had escalation clauses, or sorry, five of them had appraisal waiver clauses. In other words, if it didn't appraise, they were going to bring whatever the difference was. But of those five, all of them were uncapped. So they were saying if they were offering 1 million and it came in at 9, they were bringing the extra 100. I mean, talk about aggressive.
Yeah.
You would go to the typical open house. You've got your standard 3 unit condo building here in Chicago. You get up to the top of the top floor and there's a landing, and here there are 50 pairs of shoes, and you're going back down to the previous landing because that's the only place to take shoes off and
Wow.
put them on. So that kind of level of activity. But I think that's where it's really just fallen off for a multitude of reasons. I expect there to be a fall market, but I'd be surprised if it was more than 2 to 3 weeks of aggressive activity. And
Okay.
that's kind of where it was last year. The rates, we didn't have a war last year. Those
Right.
are two other things that I think are affecting it. I can't sit here and say how a war or the rates impact every single person, but it does have an impact.
Hmm.
You as a mortgage lender clearly understand, how much a change in rates can impact. But the rates really have hovered around 6.75 for most of the year. There was a little time where it was down closer to 6.5, but it didn't stay there that long. And contrary to what anybody who's reading and or whatever they're checking out online, presidents can't change rates,
No.
and if they could, it would have happened already because the one that's in office is pretty aggressive on all fronts. And I think that if he could have managed it, it would have happened. So if you're waiting, you know, probably not the best solution.
Yeah.
Um, but I've also had clients in the last couple of years that if they hadn't bought, they would have been priced out. 2 years ago, a 3 bedroom in Logan Square, West Town, was in the mid fives to low sixes. Last year, it was in the mid sixes, to the low sevens. This year, it's in the mid sevens.
Yeah.
They've gone up in a massive way. The biggest overpay I saw in a 3 bedroom condo this year was 180,000. And I've heard of at least two stories on single family homes where the payment was north of a half a million, and one story where they offered something like 3 million on 2.6. It was cash and they still lost.
Wow.
So there's some aggressive stuff out there. The best thing I can tell buyers is don't necessarily give up. There are better times to be buyers. When it's cold out and no one wants to go out, that's a good time. When it's in the middle of the summer and it's humid out like it is today, not necessarily the worst time, because if 60% of the buyers have given up and need a mental break, or have decided to go to Disneyland, or I don't know, wherever else it is people go, it might make it easier, you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah. Well, very good. So what do you think factored into the number of contracts that fell out earlier in the year, and are you still seeing that now?
I haven't looked at the numbers for June or July, but I wouldn't be surprised if they held tight. Combination of things. In the last 9 months, I've had 5 failed appraisals. Five. I've never had two in an 18-month period. I had three in November last year, and that is tragically high. But what I will say is that's one reason. Sometimes it's driver error on the part of the appraiser, but out of those five, I'd only say one where the appraiser, I don't think he could have hit water if he fell out of a boat.
Mm,
The rest of them, I can sit there and argue the nuts and bolts of it, but I can also see where they were coming from.
hmm
So that's one area, that's caused an issue with the failures. I think another thing is people get cold feet. This year, a couple of things happened that I have never seen before. What used to be an average 2 hour open house, a lot of agents were condensing into 90 minutes. They do two 90-minute showing windows on a Saturday and Sunday. You'd be in there with 60 people. Your buyers would make a critical decision about an enormous investment,
hmm
and then they change their mind,
hmm
get scared off, or they would write it as is. I did have one of these this year. We wrote it as is. We knew we were going to install a flood control system, but there were a couple of other things that came up in the home inspection. And when we looked at the numbers, what we thought was going to be 15 felt more like it was going to be $25,000 in improvements. And then at that point, my client said, this just is not what I want to budget for.
Right. Okay.
So that's another reason. And let's be clear, if anybody's watching this and you're thinking, I'm just a realtor, that's not how I look at my job. I look at it as I'm a financial advisor, and my specialty is real estate. For the most part, it's residential, but some of my residential real estate sales are to build portfolios for multi-unit buildings or apartment buildings for clients. And some of my work is commercial from time to time. And I say that because you're giving money to your financial advisor, but I doubt that you're making a decision that is a $500,000 purchase, even if you're only putting 20% down. These are relatively significant, things. In my entire career, if you're buying a car, the cost of your home is probably 10 to 15 times what the cost of your car is.
hmm
So if you think a car is an expensive purchase, then there's no reason you shouldn't be thinking the same way about real estate. But like I said, I think about this from a slightly, skewed point. And I personally believe you should be buying sooner rather than later. You and I shared a business coach, and he and I agreed on a couple of points. And one of the things, I think owning a home is a foundational piece to wealth building.
hmm
I think we come at the concept of the philosophy different, right? I believe that when you fix your principal and interest, you can shop your insurance and you can contest your taxes, but it's still going to move at a very slow increase over a very long time. Whereas rent in Chicago typically goes up 6, 8, 10% every year.
hmm Right.
And if that's going up, you're rarely going to get a 6, 8, or 10% raise that's going to keep pace. So your housing cost is eating more and more into the money that you bring home every week. And that means you have less money to invest in other things. You don't have to be a real estate investor to want to own a home to fix your biggest monthly cost, but that's what your housing cost is. It's your
Yeah.
biggest monthly cost,
Yep.
and it always will be. So if you are into mutual funds, stocks, whatever it is, you're just going to have more money to invest in that. For that matter, keep it simple. Let's just say you're not, Mr. I'm out there investing in all kinds of things. How about your kid's college fund?
hmm
You want to be able to put money into that, right? It's going to be easier to do if the biggest cost you have every month is fixed. You can always get rid of your streaming service. You can always buy, coffee and bring it home, grind it and make it yourself rather than going to Starbucks. There's ways to thin things out, but not when it comes to your housing cost.
Yeah.
That's always going to be the biggest.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I heard one time that along that same line is that, inflation actually helps you make your mortgage payment because, like you're saying, that, principal and interest part is fixed. The, changes in taxes and insurance are minimal, but, wage growth is at like 3%. Ideally for the Federal Reserve, they want wage growth at 3%. So every year, you're getting that spread between what your house payment is and what your income is.
Right. Right. And, it's funny. One of my clients the other day was asking me if fundamentally I thought they were kind of going down the wrong path in their thinking. And I said, no. I said, my wife and I have an incredibly bizarre setup. We bought our first place in 2000. We've owned three primary residences. This will be the last here in Illinois, anyways. She pays all the bills. All of my income goes towards investing, whether it's in real estate or otherwise. But for the last, I'll say at least 23 years, we've never spent more than $2,600 on our housing costs. We've
Nice.
gone up in price. We've gone up in loan value. Sometimes it's been a bit of luck, not saying that it can be repeated so easily.
Right.
If you go from a rate that's 4.5 to 2.5, you can lop on an extra 100,000 to the loan and know that it's there.
Yep.
And, it's worked for us for purposes of budgeting.
Hmm.
It's a conservative approach, but they were kind of in the same way. They're like, we just want to be here because we know we're going to increase our income. We just don't want to spend more than this on a monthly basis so that we can take advantage of it. And I said, that's exactly what I've been describing to people for years.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's, um, like I said, the housing part being your biggest expense, but if you can limit your expenses, you know, any of your debt to just the house, then like you said, you can put the rest in investments. You can do all sorts of things with that.
Right. So I will say, I probably have 8 or 9 active buyers right now in varying degrees. And I would say right now I have no less than 4 that are looking for a multi-unit building, whether it's to live in one so that they can keep that asset so that when they grow up, get married, have kids, and buy a single family home in the suburbs, they have an asset
Yep.
revenue source down the road.
Yep.
And if you buy one of these early enough, and this was another area I agreed with our old business coach. I don't think anybody, if they have a choice between a condo and a multi-unit, should be buying a condo
Right.
because for most people, a 2-bedroom condo is about the same size as a 2-bedroom apartment in a multi-unit. If you get 3 units and they're paying towards it, great. It's okay if it's cash flow neutral and not making any money. But if you can find a situation where 2 of the units are paying, the entire mortgage, then you've got an income when you move out.
Yeah. 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 You live in essentially rent free. You have an income when you move out. And like you're saying, you can rinse and repeat, every year, just move up, to something a little bit bigger than what you had before.
Right. And, we had a brilliant plan for one of my clients this year, and I could not be happier with the outcome. I asked them to make about $9,000 worth of improvements to their place to prep it for sale. They did. I said, without it, my guess is it's closer to 3. We listed it with it at 325. We sold it at 345. We're going to take that equity out. And in the next 3 years to 4 years, we're going to buy them 2 multi-unit buildings and then the home that the wife has always longed for in the suburbs. And they're young enough where those 2 assets, by the time they retire, will be paid off and we'll be probably bringing in them in $20,000 a month in terms of rents before maintenance, insurance, taxes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a, when you look at what you would have to have in investments to kick off that kind of return as well, it's like, you know, I think a lot of times people focus on, well, how much money do I need in my nest egg to be able to retire at this kind of income? Well, you can have a combination of real estate that's producing income and investments that are producing income as well.
Absolutely. And I've said this before, and my approach is not necessarily the right approach, but I will say that in as much as I'm trying to continually add revenue sources so that I have regular stream of income when I'm retired, I'm also trying to eliminate all of those cost obligations.
Hmm.
10 years from now, at least half of my properties will be completely paid off, but they'll all still be subject to straight line depreciation.
Hmm.
So a good chunk of the income that I'm taking is just not going to be taxed because of the straight line depreciation. And in the meantime, it gives me something to do, and it gives me a really good income with no real overhead. I bought our retirement home a couple of years ago. It's not even in this country, but I bought it specifically because I knew that it would be paid off by the time we got to use it. And, that was a strategic idea. The idea of taking on an enormous amount of debt and having a monthly payment just as I retire when it's absolutely obvious you're going to make less money in
Hmm.
most cases seems backwards to me.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So yeah, and I appreciate your financial aspect around the real estate and really leaning in on that because you know obviously there's a lot of emotions, especially for people maybe buying their first home or whatever. But being able to separate the vibes and the feelings and the emotions from hey the long term financial benefits of buying a house, but also buying the right one. You don't want to inherit somebody else's problems.
Absolutely. And this is for the last several years with the continuous drop off of inventory. One of the scariest things that we've seen is a lot of people trying to dump their problems. And it's the perfect time to do it
Hmm.
because no one wants to upset the process. No one wants to run the risk that after having put in 7 offers, that they're going to lose an 8th offer
Right.
situation.
Right.
So had a client, we bought a place 2 years later. We sold the place because as it turns out, someone in the building was absolutely horrible.
Mm.
And, not the only one. Another one, it was the next door neighbor. Another one, it was, something that wasn't properly disclosed. It was a reoccurring problem. Another one, as we found out, and I was just subpoenaed to turn over all my documents from the failed transaction. I have nothing to do with the actual, no one's suing me. I didn't
Right.
do anything wrong. My client didn't do anything wrong. We got into a transaction, and before we walked out of the attorney review, we had to terminate the transaction. And simply was because the place was neither mortgageable nor insurable.
Mm. Yeah.
And, so it's a marketplace where you really have to ask the right questions. You cannot have a real estate agent, broker, financial advisor, whatever term you want to apply to us, not pay attention to the little details. When somebody says I'm creating an offer deadline, but they don't say that they have multiple offers, is this permissible? Absolutely. Redfin's been pushing the idea of an offer deadline for some time, but that doesn't mean that there are multiple offers in. And it's a dangerous strategy if everybody bails and the seller has nothing. But there are strategies where you have to think it through. You do need to ask an extra follow-up question or two.
Yeah. Very good. So now, do you work with a CPA or a financial planner as well?
I do. I'm Most of my clients at this juncture don't usually come to me without one. So it's not something where we'll say, referring them
Okay.
as much as I would other people. It's always nice if you're interviewing your agent for the purpose of buying or for selling. You know, you're telling me I need to make $9,000 of improvements. Who you got? In my case, for the earlier story, I just brought my general contractor over. He told him what the price was, and they knocked it out. But it does make it a little more difficult if your agent comes in and says, "Hey, I got a great idea. I just don't have anybody to refer you to."
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? And the same thing applies on the buy side, maybe a little more like, what do you think it would cost to paint? Well, you know, my guess is it's probably in this range, but I tell you what, while we're at the home inspection, why don't we have somebody, come in and give us an estimate?
Yeah.
That way you know what you're looking at,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that's one of the other issues about failure rate. You think it's $3,000, but it turns out to be $10,000. And it's a
Hmm.
pretty big miss,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah. Well, Philip, I've enjoyed our time here today. There's a lot to unpack and everything. I'm sure that folks are going to want to get a hold of you. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Gosh, the absolute easiest way, only because it probably requires little to no effort. Instagram, my handle is at one hungry agent. Um, but chicagorealtypro.com is the real estate website that I maintain. But you can also find me on the Yacht Properties main website by typing my name in. But Philip only has one L in it. I will just tell you that. It's the bane of my existence. But those would be the easiest ways to get a hold of me. But if anybody's wondering, grand scheme of things, what I do. Primary residences, of course, if you're buying a home for yourself to live in. I help people build portfolios for apartment buildings. I do the occasional commercial real estate, but I will say I do restrict it to friends in the hospitality industry, um, charities and nonprofits that I partner with. And then every once in a while, something random like buying a property to do a Montessori school. I just thought it'd be cool to be part of. So I was like, I'm in. Let's do
Well, how
this.
fun.
So but that's me in a nutshell. If anybody, but I'm also an open book. So, call me, ask me some questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Love it. Love it. Well, Philip, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dennis. I appreciate you having me speak.
Have a great day.
You too.